Welcome to another episode of Talking with Kevin and Son. Hi, I am your show host, or host, Kevin McLemore, three-time published author. But today, the sun is not shining on me. It is shining on my guest and his better half. This episode is brought to you by RMK Productions and the 10 United Podcast Network. Through the power of story, our mission is to uplift, share stories and our voices, experience and perspectives using the framework of teaching, learning, and modeling. Our purpose is hope. Today, Joe Foster was born in Bolton, England, shares the same birthday as his grandfather, Joseph William Foster, the original shoemaker, the track spike running shoe and trainer. And I know this personally because I made my college living off of track and field and playing football. So I am very familiar with your product. Born into the family business, Joe and his late brother, Jeff, worked their way through the Foster's Athletic Shoe Company until both hit that family's glass ceiling, meaning Joe's dad and his uncle had their differences and didn't see the future of this homegrown company growing into a global brand. Today, you will learn about Joe Foster and his wife, Julie. Learn the lessons of entrepreneurship through firsthand stories on how the Mercury Company became Reebok. And if you hang around long enough, you'll learn more about Joe Foster, the original shoemaker, and giving back. And before I introduce Joe, I want to share something with you.
Hi. My name's Penelope Wilson, and I designed a fitness product 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, and I've been working on it for the last 4.5 years. And I have been honored to have met Joe Foster, who is the founder of Reebok here in the UK, and his wife, Julie. And they have been such a tremendous help to me. They're such kind people, and they have that wonderful old school values and manners and attitude. And I will be ever grateful for meeting them and having them in my life. And Joe is a true gentleman who founded Reebok in Bolton many years ago and took it to massive success, and nothing has changed him. He's still a wonderful gentleman from Bolton, and I've been absolutely honoured to have met them. And Joe is working very hard for me with my fitness product to introduce me to some very large companies, and I can't say enough good things about them.
That's our lovely Penny.
It is Penny, yes, lovely. Yes, it is a lovely girl.
We love her.
Yeah, we do.
Well, she loves you. And the reason why I asked Penny to do that, because no one can do this one thing we call life alone, and no one can be successful in this business alone. There are no self-made millionaires that came from a millionaire background. You guys came from, normal, humble upbringings. Now, Joe, I'm going to direct this to you.
Okay, Kevin.
Joseph William Foster, your grandfather.
Yes.
Knowing what we all know here in America and the world about the Reebok brand and Joe Foster, we're going to tell the original story. If your grandfather was here today and would sit back into his settee and cross his legs and have a little bit of rum, and he was talking and he was telling everyone how he felt about his grandson, what would you think your grandfather would say to you today, Joe?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because it really, it almost asks me to use some ego.
Please do.
And really, ego is the one thing I try and avoid. I think my grandfather would have said, "Well, Joe, well done. Well done. Glad you did that. Great." He may say a few other things as well, but that might be embarrassing. But I think well done. Yes, I think well done. That's enough for me.
That's well done. And Penny, sitting here by a legend, and I am taken back to, I've known a lot of famous people, and when I started this platform, I said the only way that I was ever going to talk to celebrities and stars that they were giving back. So we will talk about some of the foundations you guys have done, but this story is such a remarkable story, coming out of World War II, to you and your brother trying to convince your father and your uncle to see beyond Bolton and to think much bigger. You had ideas, you had dreams. So 1958, a couple of things happened. You were born. You saw the writing on the wall, and I'm going to fast track the conversation of the indifferences between your father. Can you give our listeners a little background to growing up as the shoemaker's son and apprentice, and what day-to-day life was like back then after coming out of World War II in service?
Well, I was born in 1935, which means that I was only 4 when World War II started.
Okay, please
and
forgive me.
I was 10 when it ended. So, when you're a youngster, when you're a kid and you're running about, and okay, things like bombs are dropping on Manchester, but in a way, this is the time when you're learning everything, you're taking everything in. And to me, it was a time to sort of enjoy it, rather oddly. We didn't, as children, we didn't sort of exist in fear. I'm pretty sure that my father and mother, they were probably scared of what could happen. But being a youngster, you're not brought into this world with all the knowledge that you're frightened of this, you shouldn't like this. So as children, both Jeff and I, we probably enjoyed the fact that there were no lights on. We could run around in the dark, because after the war, all the lights came on and it was a totally different world. But during that time, I guess we just grew up with different, I suppose, different principles and different sort of way of looking at life, because you couldn't do a lot of things. And but we didn't know. We're young. You don't know these things. So in that sense, we were lucky. But once the war was over, I was 10 years old. I'd obviously remembered quite a few things from the war. I remember watching looking at Manchester, because Bolton was slightly higher than Manchester, and we could look at the bright sky. I don't say we could see any flames from bomb dropping, but we could see the bright skies. And it's something that I've never forgotten. I've also never forgotten the air raid war, the sirens going off, and the fact that when the sirens went up, you had to go back home and go into some sort of shelter. That happened for a few years, but people just got used to it and didn't bother anymore. So it was just a funny sort of life. After the war, we started having education, because during the war, the teachers, they were all away. They were all fighting. And so we had very few teachers. Whatever women teachers were around, we had 1 or 2. But education started for me at 10 years old. And I went to college. I left college at 17, and I had 1 year working in the family business. And I guess really, we didn't know much different. You're still enjoying life at 17, going out, doing the things, playing soccer, whatever it is. You're still enjoying life. It was at 18 that I had to go, and my brother had to go, to do national service. Now that probably did change our lives, because up until then, mother was making the bed, making your meals, doing the washing, doing everything that sort of what is normal in life. And yet when we go away and we have to start looking after ourselves, you have to start thinking a little bit differently. And those 2 years, I think, made a difference to both Jeff and myself, because when we came back to the parent company, and we came back to a failing company.
When you say failing, because early on in the book, some very notable runners in the UK were wearing the trike spike shoes designed by the Foster Company. How can such a successful invention fall on the words of a failing company? What happened?
Well, I mean, okay, what happened is that when my grandfather died in 1933, and that's 15 months before I was born. And as you said, I'm born on his birthday. So grandmother said, okay, you brought your name with you. So that's me, Joseph. And grandfather, he had, even in 1904, he had world records in his spike shoes. In 1908, he had gold medals at the London Olympics. And during the 20s, he had lots of gold medals, 3 in particular. And if you, Chariots of Fire, it's Harold Abrahams, Lloyd Burley, and Eric Liddell. They were 3 gold medal winners immortalized in the film Chariots of Fire. So yes, this was a famous company. Plus, I don't know how much you know of the UK and football teams. Maybe you've heard of Manchester United.
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Well, grandfather actually made training shoes and boots for 96 football teams and rugby teams. And those football teams include all the leading football teams: Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal,
Liverpool.
Yes, there's Liverpool,
Chelsea.
There's Rangers, Celtic, all the football teams, even Bolton Wanderers, which was our local team, of course. And by the time Jeff and I came back from doing national service, we didn't have a football business. That had been taken by Adidas. Adidas had come in to the UK and taken that business. So we didn't have, and they didn't have sales reps. They didn't have a marketing policy. They did some advertising in the sports magazines. But apart from that, they were not building a company. And how can I say? I think that the size of the company remained static, but the window in which they traded was going smaller and smaller because other people were coming into the business. So we tried, as you've said in the book, we tried to get my father to talk to my uncle, but he didn't. All they did was they feuded, just like Addy Dassler and Rudy Dassler. They feuded. However, Rudy Dassler had the sense to leave the company and set up his own company, Puma. Whereas the Fosters, my father and my uncle, they just kept feuding. So it was that really prompted us. As I say, when grandfather died, grandmother sort of was there to keep the peace. And she kept the peace between her sons. I don't think Jeff and I realized that that's what was going on. She was keeping the peace, but she died whilst we were away doing national service, and the company just didn't move on. And when Jeff and I came back, we did. We came back to the father and an uncle feuding, fighting on occasions. We had to separate them on occasions. So if we couldn't do anything about it, we tried. But in the end, we decided we needed to leave that company and set up our own company.
Well, the way that you wrote the book, you convinced your brother to leave, and your father held a little ill will. He didn't transfer that over to your younger brother, Jeff, which Jeff, you left the house and surrendered your brother to stay in the house with the person that was pissed off with both of you.
Well, yes, yeah. My brother was older than me. He was 2 years older.
I got my facts all wrong. Please forgive me.
Just slightly, but that doesn't matter. I guess that I was a little bit more forward, probably a little more cheeky, not quite so peaceful as my older brother, and to an extent, because I was that way inclined, I got blamed. I got blamed for taking my brother away. He was equally as anxious as me to to set up a new company, but he didn't say too much. I did most of the talking. So I guess that's why my father blamed me.
Yeah, you said in the book, and I'm saying your vision. You said that the running cycle shoe sales were steady, and that it would be easy for you just to settle for a stress-free life, maintain life as it was for you and your brother. But it was tempting to stay in that lane. But you saw beyond just making a wage. If life was going to turn from a good life to a great life, your vision had to be challenged, not on a local company, but it had to become a global brand. In your words, you wanted to prove to yourself that you can win. That's a very strong attitude for a young man, that you wanted to prove on a global basis that you wanted to win.
I guess that when you initially start, necessity really drove us to leave the parent company. Necessity was that they were not trying to improve and grow the company. The company was dying, and I told that to my father. And I think amongst that conversation is, look, we have to progress. If we don't progress, if we don't grow, we will die. And so in leaving that parent company, it was okay. It's no good saying this to your father unless you go ahead and do exactly what you said, that we have to progress. So whatever compels or impels you to do these things, it was possibly, I got to show them we can do it. We can really make this into a good company, a big company. But first of all, you start with those first steps. So just starting the company was an achievement in its first place.
And I agree with that. And that's the reason why I highlighted this point, because coming out of COVID, a lot of businesses that were successful before COVID started to fail, and they didn't realize where the value of their company was. We constantly think the customer is always first, the product is the most important, but the most valuable product is Joe and Jeff. Is when you come to the head of the dragon and the tail says, we can make life better for you. And instead of acknowledging and being heard, most companies shut their employees down. And what happens is employees look for opportunities elsewhere, where you and your brother started a business. I don't know how you started a business, because we all think about profit and loss. I didn't read that your parents gave you a golden purse to start your business. How did you and your brother start a business with just what little bit you had in your knickers?
Well, I guess it's when you're faced with making a choice of it's this or nothing, you go for this. And okay, Jeff had a little bit of money. I had invested in a house, and selling the house made a little bit of money. So we didn't have much money at all. We didn't. And in those days, the one good thing that we did, though, before we left the foster company, was to go to college at night, go to shoemaking college. And there was a college quite close by, probably 15 miles away from Bolton. And we went there. We went there really to learn more about shoemaking. But what we did find, we found a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of people who knew the business. And so when we were leaving Foster's and we wanted machinery, we knew there were a lot of people there who helped. A lot of people, yeah, I know where you can get that machine. I know where you can get that machine. And you need, so whatever we needed that we didn't know, we could ask the people at the college. And they were more than helpful. They would go out of the way to help. So that was incredible, and I think that was probably one of the best things we did in those early days, was to go to college and meet people who could help, and they helped us buy our machinery. In fact, we managed to set up our factory for about £250, which, well, mind you, in those days that was probably like $500, maybe a little bit more in dollars. Right now, it's $250 almost.
Right.
The pound has dropped against it. But so we started our factory, and I think that sort of helped. Those people, we didn't feel alone. We felt we had help, and I think that was good. And yeah, anybody starting out, as you said, you don't do this on your own. You need people, and you need people who are possibly family, but family doesn't necessarily have to mean, your immediate family. Family can be other people. Family can be people that you really get on with, can share a feeling, share an idea. And throughout my life with building the company, I met an awful lot of people who were willing to help. A lot who weren't, but a lot of people who were willing to help. And I think that really started us on our way.
Yeah, I was taught by one of the co-founders of Netflix. He says that people, when they invest, they don't invest in the product, they invest in the person behind the product. And that's how it gets started. And it's amazing for you and your brother to be so young, and you be the younger brother. Now I understand your motivation for kicking and screaming and wanting something different. But when you look at it from an entrepreneur standpoint, is that you had a vision, you had enough forethought or strength to trust your gut. You connected with someone that was like-minded, being your brother, and then you understood where your shortcomings and your strengths were, because one, you realized that you needed to understand beyond the everyday labor work of how to run a business, how to manufacture shoes, and educate yourself. And then you surrounded yourself with like-minded people that shared your dream. I know with my company, I always say that every day I get up and I do what I do in order to make the people that are with me successful. And I only surround myself with people that show up every single day that want to make the company I'm developing successful. And you seem to do that without saying so many words, exactly what I said. But right. Also with your success has a tendency to draw in magnets when you look for help otherwise. When I say the words or the names, Wilson, Gunn, and Ellis, and I say good times and bad times, please share with us the story of Wilson, Gunn, and Ellis and how that came to be, because your company is starting to thrive, and your vision starts to take on new legs, and you realize that you needed to do more. And with every company, we start out as doing business as, and then before we have to go through the legalities of incorporating, and you started out as LLC. So talk about William, Gunn, and Ellis and your best friends there.
Well, yes, it's a two-edged sword, that one, Wilson, Gunn, and Ellis.
That's why I said they need to read the book. This is a wonderful book, The Shoemaker by Joe Foster. It is the original story of the man that created and he founded Reebok. It is a great read, especially for someone starting off in business. And in order to know the story of William, Gunn, and Ellis, you have to read it in great detail. We're going to kind of skim over it. But go ahead and tell us the good and the bad times with those people.
The good and the bad times. Well, the whole thing started off with my accountant. We were only 18 months into our business, but my accountant said, Joe, you're doing pretty good. You better register that name, Mercury. And okay, we're green, we're a bit naive. Why do we need to register that name, Mercury? Well, if somebody else thinks that the idea of a Mercury shoe is pretty good and they like to see the Mercury shoe, they start making it, you're going to be in trouble. So you better go and see Wilson, Gunn, and Ellis. They're patent agents. Okay, so I go along, and I think it was Mr. Ellis actually that I saw, and so he's going to check out Mercury. Mercury was our name. He checked it out, and he found that it was already pre-registered by Lotus and Delta, which are part of British Shoe Corporation. They're big. They're very big. And he said, but they're not using the name. So I asked them if they would let you have it, and he said they would let you have it for £1,000. Well, as I just said earlier, we set a whole factory up for £250. £1,000 was way out of our budget. We couldn't do that. He did suggest that we could take them to court, because they're not using it. You could take them to court and you could claim the name. But I asked again how much that would cost, and again it was £1,000. So that wouldn't work. Okay, so it was a nice day in May, and Mr. Ellis pointed through the window to a sign, and that was Kodak. And I said, "What's with Kodak?" And he said, "It's a made-up name. They made the name up, so it's their name. No problem. Nobody's going to contest it." Okay. And he said, "Be great if you can do that, but look, if you want to need a new name, bring me 10. And I'm saying, 10? We got to get this is our company. We got to love whatever name we choose. We've really got to get behind it. And he said, "Well, we need 10 because it's difficult these days." And that's going back to 1960. It's difficult to find a name that is open and free for you to use. So, okay. So I go back, and we're sitting down around the table, and we came up with the name Cougar. That's a good name, Cougar. Cougar Sports. Yeah, why not? Why not? Any more? Come on, we need 10. Falcon. Falcon's a good name. Yeah, okay, Falcon Sports. Right. Let me take you back to 1943. I said during World War II, and I am 8 years old. And like with COVID, people couldn't travel. There was no traveling during World War II. And so nothing happened except for local events. And I am entered into a local 80-yard sprint race at the local athletics club. And I win the race. Great. I've got Foster's shoes on with spikes. That helped. I don't think anybody else had even heard of spikes, never mind running spikes. I won the race, and I got for my prize. And what do I get? I get a dictionary. And I'm saying, "Guys, where's the football? What do I want with a dictionary?" Middle of the war, with hardly any education going on. And on top of that, it was an American dictionary. It was a Webster's American Dictionary in 1943. I suppose I could have kicked the dictionary about, but I never did. And here we are now, fast forward, 1960. We're looking for names. And my American dictionary sat by me. And I like the letter R. So, okay, I think we'll start with R, right? Turn up to R and start thumbing through the pages. It doesn't take long before you get to RE. So I get to REEBOK, Reebok. What's that? A South African gazelle. Gazelle, we're a running company. Gazelle, that was it. All of a sudden, we loved that. Reebok, a gazelle. That was top of the list. And with the other 9 names, I think I maybe have more than 9 names. I took these to Mr. Ellis, Wilson, Gunn and Ellis. I took the names. And I said, "Look, we want that one. We really want to be in love with this." And Reebok, we really feel that's the name. We want to be in love. Okay, but he's a lawyer. Okay. 2 weeks later, he came back. "Joe, you've got your wish. You can have Reebok." Okay, fantastic. Right. He said, "But the registrar has got one caveat. And that is if somebody, wherever they are, start to make shoes out of Reebok skin, you can't stop them." Well, Jeff and I, we looked at each other and said, "That's never going to happen. No, that's impossible. We'll have Reebok." Well, because of that, though, the registrar in his wisdom said, "We can only put you in Part B of the register." Up until 2 months before, we didn't even know a register existed, so it didn't matter to us. So we're in Section B. 10 years later, the registrar came back and said, "We've moved you now to the A section." And okay, why is that? Well, he said, "Now everybody knows that Reebok is a sports shoe, and the animal has to come second." So that's Wilson, Gunn and Ennis. However, that was the good part of Wilson, Gunn and Ennis. We were a struggling company, and we were struggling. We were still struggling. And to register your name, it costs a lot of money. And we registered, I think it was America, Japan, and Europe. We could manage that. But we're a bit slow in paying. So we didn't know it. They put the company, what did they do?
A winding up petition.
It was a winding up petition for the company. And we didn't know what that was. I hurried across to see my accountant and say, "What's all this?" And he said, "You're in trouble."
That's to our listeners. That's when the lawyers get together and figure out a way. If you can't pay, they're trying to take your business. Am I right, Joe?
Well, they tried to close down our business. Simple as that. Yeah, they just closed it down. Which is like, they never even sort of said, "Come on, can you pay us a bit? Can you do something?" They didn't say anything. They just, because we didn't meet their terms, they just put us into a winding up petition. But fortunately, I found a good lawyer.
Yeah, and at that time, like most people, that business, you struggle. You don't share the contents of or the drama that's going on with your business with family and friends. And that time, you had your daughter Kate. You did not share at that time your first wife, Jean, what was going on, because you figured out you can carry alone. Am I correct? I think I got the book right.
Yeah. You get to the point where unless you find an answer, don't give somebody else the problem.
Right.
Don't pass the problem into the family, because they're not going to find the answer. You have to find the answer. And so it was okay. Jeff knew, we shared that much, but no. We didn't. I didn't tell the family. It was, in fact, I didn't even tell the family what the answer we hoped would be. But it was a good lawyer that got the answer, and they had to accept some terms. So Wilson, Gunn, and Ellis had to accept terms, because we had offered to pay it, but we couldn't pay it all at once. So we offered a payment plan. And providing we kept to that, that was okay. So the winding up petition was thrown out. But that was our first scary moment, really scary moment.
Well, there is a happy ending to this, because you retained the Reebok name, you retained the business. You were in a warehouse where I think you had moved both you and your brother and his family into the warehouse. You had floors that every single day were questionable if they were going to maintain the stability of the weight of the machinery, and there were needs. But you still looked across the pond, and your vision was to break into the American market. Adidas, as we know it, I think Brooks, and what was the other shoe company? I don't know if Nike was.
The New Balance, Atonic.
Was Nike thriving at that time?
Well, who?
Was Nike thriving at that time?
No, Nike. I don't think Nike was even on the scene at that time. But if they were just doing. Phil Knight was just doing this out of his garage at that time. But no, Nike were not on the scene at that time.
Now, your brother Jeff was pretty much content with doing business as you were doing it. You had reps that were going to local sports stores. Many of the celebrities there, athletes, had their own stores. You had went to a sporting goods store and you were making boots, but you still looked across the pond, and you kept saying, "How do I break into the U.S. market?" What was that red light moment for you understanding how to advertise and market your way into the United States with the unknown product called Reebok?
Yeah, well, the problem that I had was growing the business, or today scaling the business. So the problem I had was that we were in athletics. We did a bit of rugby, but the big market in sport was soccer. Football for us, but soccer as it's known in America. And okay, that was the big market, but we could get a certain size with athletics, but I knew that if we were going to expand in athletics or running, the big market for that was America. So many of the universities and colleges had teams, and they had coach, and coach was a god. And you could go to a university on a scholarship, a sports scholarship. So I knew that was the big market. 350 million Americans at that time with a good disposable income, and a lot of people going to college. I knew a coach across there. I knew Frank Ryan. He was one of the head coaches at Yale.
Right.
And he had been he had been buying Foster's shoes until Foster's closed down, because Foster's closed down about 18 months after we left. It was dying, and it did die.
Okay.
So I knew the market across in America. Plus, English is spoken in America.
True
People
that.
used to say, why not go to Europe? Because Europe is bigger. There's 400 million people in Europe. Smaller country, but 400 million people. But they speak 30 different languages, and there's 30 different countries and cultures. Much more difficult. Plus the fact both Adidas and Puma were right in the center of Europe. Why go to the Lion's Den when the pastures were over there, across the pond? Those were the nice pastures with some nice white space that we could get into. So that was great. However, talking to the family, it was like, it's too expensive, Joe. We can't. How can you justify going across to America and taking part? That's an expensive trip. Luckily, I am reading a magazine called Eurosport. And the British government had decided, and they were advertising this, they wanted British sports manufacturers to export. And they would pay for a stand at the NSJ show. The NSJ show is the National Sporting Goods of America, and that was in Chicago in February, early February in Chicago. Cold. They would pay, yes, cold, very cold. Oh, absolutely. But they would pay for the stand. They would also pay for the return airfare, and they would pay 50% of my expenses whilst I'm there in America. So I didn't get any more arguments from the family. Joe, you can go. So off I went to America with a friend, and we actually went to New York, first of all. We actually stayed in a place in Times Square, and I went to look at the sports stores. My friend was looking at the outdoor stores. Then we moved on to Chicago. Cold, yes, very cold. And went to the show. This is 1968.
All right.
In 1968, the guys loved the shoes. That's great. Where do you get these shoes from? And I'm saying from England. And they're saying, is that New England? And no, I'm saying not New England, it's England, across the water. Well, we'd established that. But what we also established was the fact that in those days, as in the UK, lots of sports stores were just small stores run by ex-sportsmen. And to import the product, no. One or two did. I think Dick's Sports, they imported a few. But really, no, they didn't want to know. So 68, when do I get in? I get into America in 1979. 11 years. 11 years of continually going to America. Not all the time did we go to Chicago. It was one in every four they had in Houston.
Right.
So going down to Houston was fine. That was nice and warm. Great. Otherwise, the other 3 years out of 4 was in Chicago. But what the big thing, I tried. I had 6 attempts to get in with different people, and we failed. We failed miserably. On 6 occasions, we failed. But the thing that happened for us was running. Running became a big category in America very late in the 60s, and by 1975, it was really big. And with it, Runner's World. Runner's World was a magazine, started as an A4 in about 1968. By 1975, it was 50, 60 pages, full, glossy, great magazine telling everybody where the next runs were, the 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. And he would also give results of races. And in his wisdom, Bob Anderson decided he would tell everybody which was the number one shoe to buy. Nike. By that time, Nike had grown tremendously with the boom in running. Nike. You can buy Nike. Phil Knight, unfortunately, he was importing his shoes from Japan and Asia. And all of a sudden, 350 million Americans, maybe 10% are now running. That's 35 million runners. And maybe 10% of those wanted that number one shoe. 3.5 million. Could he get those shoes? No. Could they turn up that wick and get the production? No. And after 12 months, Bob Anderson decided now we have a new number one shoe. And I don't know which that was. It may have been New Balance. It may have been Brooks. Same thing happened. They were bringing the product in from Asia. Couldn't match the numbers. So the year after, Bob Anderson either was persuaded or he hit on the idea of introducing star ratings. So a 5-star shoe would be at the top and you could put down.
Right.
That's when I knew we could make a 5-star shoe. Making a number one shoe, no, that was not on for us. That would never happen. We didn't advertise enough in Runner's World. We advertised, but we were not the biggest of advertisers. So we'll never get a number one. But 5 stars, I knew we could get a 5-star. And so I am in Chicago in 1979. We built our 5-star in our Aztec, which was to become a 5-star. We built that in 1978, and with other shoes in our gold range. Inca was a spike, Midas was a track shoe. We got a lot of gold medals at Edmonton, which was the Commonwealth Games. So we had a good shoe. And we're looking at February in 1979. The shoe edition would come out in August. And by that time, running was a big thing. And we were known. And Kmart came up, and the sales rep or the buyer there, he wanted 25,000 pairs. 25,000 pairs. Well, for our small factory back in England, that was about 6 months' work. However, I had friends, as we've mentioned earlier. I have friends, and one of my friends, he was just setting up the sports division for Bata. I don't know if you've heard of Bata.
Mm-mm.
No, Bata really, they're still the world's biggest shoemaker in volume. They're still.
Speaking of shoemaker, I'm gonna ask you to pause that for 1 second, because I just want to let our listeners know that if you just tuned in, we are talking with Mr. and Mrs. Joe and Julie Foster, the original shoemaker, and his new release book, The Shoemaker. The untold story of the British family's firm that became the global brand known as Reebok. And when we come back, I want to talk about the Lawrence Sports Company. We're gonna follow up with that relationship with Kmart and how that turned out, and understanding why the answer was yes over no, or maybe it was no over yes. But I also want to find out about finding firemen. We'll talk about that. So Joe, Kmart, let's go back to Kmart. And coming up, they had placed an order. And most people don't know, when you get into a big box store, that it's not the safe haven most people realize. It realizes that you've got to earn your space on the shelf, and you've got to continue that. Otherwise, your product comes back to you in any condition they send it in. And so, and for most people, that's a dream come true. And for some people, that is a nightmare. So Lawrence Sports was part of that conversation before or after Kmart. And you noted that in your book.
Lawrence Sports were before Kmart. Yeah, they came before Kmart, but that was the progression of our business in the UK. The progression of our business in the UK and in athletics was really good. Lawrence Sports, they made soccer boots, but they only made soccer boots. And their distribution, they had representatives all over the country, and they sold a lot of soccer boots. But they didn't make the shoes that we were making, and we were making trainers, sneakers possibly, but they were training shoes, as well as spike shoes and different country shoes. So we made a different product, and the head of sales at Lawrence said, "Why don't you come to us, and we'll handle all your sales." For me, that was great. It didn't turn out great in the end, but it was great that somebody else who covered the country would look after all the sales. And because we were sort of a different product to Lawrence, it fit in very nicely. So that's where Lawrence came in, and Lawrence were looking after distribution in the United Kingdom. And when it came to America, we moved on a bit, because unfortunately, Lawrence Sports, the man who was really running the company, he was getting on in his years and decided to retire. Only something like 18 months after Lawrence had been doing our distribution, he decided to retire, and his son-in-law took on the business. And keeping that story short, his son-in-law and the head of sales, who was a friend of mine, did not get on. Result was that the head of sales left and took all the salesmen with him to set up the Barter company, the Barter's sports division. And unfortunately, the son didn't have, Mr. Lawrence's son did not have the same acumen as he did. I mean, the first thing is he should never have fallen out with a salesman, because his sales suddenly his sales went. And of course, this also affected our product. And to the point that they made a number of mistakes. And within a very short while, they were really going out of business.
Almost cost you your business, didn't it?
It almost cost our business. But the only thing I could do was to go take a big van, go down and collect all the shoes they hadn't paid for. And we had to do that before they went out of business. That we did, and brought them back. But of course, I think if our bank manager had heard the fact that we were not going to get paid for all those invoices that we'd sent out, I think we would have been in serious trouble also. As it was, we put together a team and some ideas. We went back to our athletes who we'd been dealing with direct. We went to all the schools, and we started to sell a highly discounted Reebok shoe. And it was highly discounted. However, we were selling it for more money than Lawrence were paying us. So in a way, we were still making more money. We managed to clear in about I think maybe at the outside 3 months, we managed to clear that stock. So we did really well on that. And during that period, another company who thought that our product was really good, they came up, Carter Pocock, and they said, "Can we be your distributor?" So having had a bad lesson, I did sort of put some caveats into that as to what they must do. But they took over that UK distribution, and all this happened before I went. Well, I'd been going to America, but before the 1979 date that Kmart were sort of stepping up and saying, "I want 25,000 pairs." So, what had happened in the UK, again, we could have gone out of business with Lawrence Sports failure, but we survived that, and we now have a new distributor in the UK. So I'm now 1979. Kmart come to the stand, 25,000 pairs. And as I said, my friend who left Lawrence, he'd gone to Barter, and Barter, as I say, biggest company, still the biggest manufacturing company in the world. They're big in Latin America and big in India, but in Europe and America, they've just disappeared. So my friend said, "Look, if you get a 5-star, we will help you at Barter." And Barter are big companies, have said they could do that. But then Kmart, he said, "But we need a better price." Well, although Barter could do a better price than we could do with our small factory, I knew that's not what he meant. He meant we want you to get them from Asia.
Right.
So again, we had sort of figured out that if we get a 5-star, we probably would need to get some Asia production. And I had met with the agents for one of the biggest Korean factories. I met with him in London, and they were already working on samples. So I had that in place as well. Okay, so as you mentioned, the problem with a big box company like Kmart, if you don't reach the financials that they're looking for on the square footage they've given you, that could be your first and your last order for 25,000 pairs.
Yes.
Towards the end of the 1979 show, Paul Fireman came along. And Paul Fireman, he was running a company with his brother and his brother-in-law. It was Boston Camping. Boston Camping was selling tents, fishing rods, you name it, all the bits and pieces. And we got on well. I could talk to Paul, and he was an owner, also struggling. He was doing what he'd been doing for the last 10 years and probably not moving anywhere, but just going around that same sort of fishbowl, just doing, okay, we're doing a nice business, but going nowhere. And Paul said, look, Joe, if you get a 5-star shoe, I'll be your distributor. Okay, it's another one. But I could get on with Paul, and Paul had a business, and he was doing reasonable. So at that point, we left the show. We're in February. The shoe edition is not coming out until August, and whether we get a 5-star with our Aztec, we have to wait that time. So I go across to America. I go to see Kmart, and I'm not impressed by the buyer, one of 100 buyers in a big room, and I'm thinking, no, doesn't really fit our culture. So I go on to Boston and meet up with Paul, meet his brother and his brother-in-law, see his nice business. Great, that's okay. And later, Paul came across to the UK to see if really Reebok existed and to what extent it existed. So we managed to take him to a few races. Of course, we knew who would win the race because, you know, we'd supplied these athletes, and we knew that at least 50% of the people running in those races would be running in Reebok.
You're a smart man.
No, I think Paul Fireman knew exactly what we were doing. I don't think he was. I think he was smart enough. But I think as far as he was concerned, it did prove at least that we were on the ground, and we were quite significantly on the ground. So that's pretty good. Okay. Last week in July, now the Runner's World edition will be out. And I phoned Paul. And I say, Paul, please, just go down to the local kiosk and see if the Runner's World magazine's there. Check us out. An hour later, he came back and said, Joe, Aztec, 5 stars. That was it. We had a 5-star shoe. But he said, not only that, Inca, which was our spike, and Midas, which was our racing shoe, they also got 5 stars. So we arrive on the American market with 3 5-star shoes. Up to you, Paul.
Way to go. Way to go. You know, I will tell you, I've worn your product. I've raced in probably high school and college in your spikes. But I want everyone to know, how did they get your book? How can they reach Joe? How can they reach you, and how can they get their book? Where's your book being sold right now?
Well, in Amazon, and the other one, if you want a signed copy,
jwfosterheritage.com.
jwfosterheritage.com. That gets you a signed copy if you want that. But the easy way is Amazon. Get to Amazon and Shoemaker. And yes, it's there. It's possible. You can get the
Kindle.
Well, there's the hard book. There's also the paperback. You can get Kindle, and you can get audio.
Okay, I tried to get the audio and it only came up in a different language. I have to look back and get that again.
Yeah, you have to, I think you have to get the audio from amazon.co.uk
Okay, I have to
as
get it.
opposed to amazon.com.
Now, you know,
Okay, yeah.
everyone says make a long story short. I purposely ran this interview longer because I needed people to hear the story. Your book is 350 something odd pages long. It is a great read. It gets better as it goes along. When you get to chapter 21, with Finding Firemen, it gets better because you keep reading, okay, what's the success of Reebok? I know the story personally. I don't know all the details, and so we're going to get the details. When did you turn the corner of connecting with the United States, and how? And I will tell you, I have a picture of me teaching an aerobics class in your shoes. I don't want to make that public because Jane Fonda had an outfit and all the men wore the tights and the different colors and the shoes and the leggings, whatever. And I happened to be in one of those outfits. But go ahead and tell us about how Reebok became Reebok, the brand we know. And it went from being unknown to being at the top tier and the must shoe that you had to have it during the time in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s.
Well, indeed, it was probably the 80s, I think 82 when we first sort of came across aerobics. But we were a running company and we were doing nicely. But we had a tech rep down in Los Angeles called Angel Martinez. And Angel, yeah, he's a good tech rep, no problems, that's it. But his wife, Frankie, is going to aerobic classes and coming back and just follow it, absolutely loving it. And I was saying, what are you doing? And she said, well, we're doing aerobics. And of course, in those days, Arnold saying, okay, what's aerobics? Well, she said, we're actually exercising to music. Great. Can I come down to the next class? Yes. Arnold went to the next class. And what he saw was an instructor wearing a pair of sneakers. And we think they were New Balance at the time. And the class, half the class are wearing the same shoe, and the other half not wearing any footwear at all, just barefoot. Arnold had that. This was his light bulb moment. This was something that, and he thought, why don't we make a shoe specifically for aerobics on a woman's last, woman's sizes, and make it of glove leather, nice and cushioned. Brilliant. And they did. And I didn't know they were doing this. I had not a clue that they were making these shoes. And he'd been up to see Paul Fireman when he thought, oh, let's make a shoe. Went to see Paul Fireman, and Paul Fireman, he's so excited. And he said to Paul, we've got to make this shoe. We've got to make a shoe. And Paul's saying, slow down, Arnold. We're a running company, and we're doing nicely, thank you. And he sort of put Arnold off and sort of just, watch it, see if it's, see what it's like. And if it's really good, we can get into it. But Arnold went round to the back door and had a word with Steve Liggett. Steve Liggett was our product man. He did a better job with Steve. He persuaded him to get 200 pairs of samples of the shoe we just described. Okay, he got his 200 pairs and he gave them to the instructors and some of the leading girls. Fabulous. They loved them. They just didn't use them for the aerobics. They went to work in them. They loved them so much. They were walking about in these shoes. However, they were made out of glove leather. And glove leather is 0.7 of a millimeter thick.
Mm-hmm.
When you take the surface off, because you got to put glue in there to stick the sole on, you're about half a millimeter, 0.5 of a millimeter. If you can imagine that, that's nothing. Yes, they're good for gloves, but for shoes, when the girls start jumping about and doing the things, after a month, they fell apart. But we're in Los Angeles, and the girls love the shoes so much, they just went out and bought another pair. They love them so much. Okay, anywhere else in the world, I think that would have been the end of Reebok.
Right.
Because if your shoe falls apart. But in America, and particularly in Los Angeles, they give you more than one chance. Yes, we love them so much. they're bound to get it right. Took us about a couple of months to really get it right, using a leather more like a garment leather, which was still soft but had more substance.
Right.
We got that right. And then, as you alluded to, when Jane Fonda went out, bought a pair of Reebok shoes to wear in her exercise videos, that was it. We were a $9 million company at that time. The end of that year, we were a $30 million company, then a $90 million company, $300 million, then $900 million. In under 5 years, we'd gone from almost zero to $1 billion. And that's what, yeah.
3.5 the way everyone else writes it. But
yeah.
the funny thing is that you gave shoes away for free. And I think Reebok One, you had over, I think I'm going to say you were probably one of the first influencers, social media influencers. 132,000 people or fitness instructors weren't being paid. That was going around promoting your product. Best marketing program, best advertising program, and did not cost you a dime. You're freaking brilliant. I'll tell you that now. You're freaking brilliant.
Well, it takes more than me. There's a whole team there in America working hard, and they come up with some great ideas. And of course, when you look at the aerobic shoe, if somebody had told me before they actually made them, we're going to make these out of glove leather, I would have said, no, you don't, because glove leather's for gloves.
Yeah.
But, the first time they tried to get around this was they started to line the glove leather with nylon.
Right.
At that point, I heard about it, and I said, no, if you line it with nylon, you're going to stop what leather is all about, and that it breathes, leather breathes. So what did they do? They punched holes in the front so that it would breathe. And right. This is a lesson for me that marketing is so much better than being a shoemaker.
Yep.
Marketing is so important. And so I learned lessons. Yes, and giving away shoes, it's a cheap way. Now it costs you money.
Yes. So for my listeners, I just want to tell you, I'm not going to go through the whole book, all right, because I want you to read it. Because as an author, the only way authors become successful if people know your story and they repeat and share your story. So I'm going to ask you to go to Amazon.com and pick up the book, The Shoemaker by Joe Foster, the original Shoemaker. Buy the book, write a review. If you want a signed autograph copy from Joe, how do you get that, Julie?
From www.jwfosterheritage.com.
All right. I've grown to know and love both of these people very well. And I've said this 1,000 times. I get calls from celebrities all the time wanting to be on my podcast to promote their movies and whatever. And I always said, I'm never, ever going to have a guest on my show that's not doing something for the community or to help someone else. And the one thing I want to share with you is another little bit of
Joe is such a kind chap. Listening to his story the other evening in London was so inspiring, and just people fell in love with him. He's old school, very traditional, fabulous manners, great values, and it's lovely to hear how he did business and how he got into America and then got into the aerobics industry, and how humble he is now, and what a fascinating story. A lot of people I've been doing business with are cutthroat, and it's all about money, and manners and values don't seem to matter to them. In fact, a friend of mine said to me, Penny, there's no place in business for manners. And I was just determined to not do business like that. And that's why it's always so lovely to hear Joe's story, because he's such an authentic, genuine guy. And I'm very proud and honoured to be friends with Joe and his wife, Julie.
And, with that said, part of my motivation for having you guys on here after meeting you during our icebreaker call is that it is literally almost impossible after you meet Joe and Julie. I'm a Southern boy, should be Julie and Joe Foster, not to fall in love with these two people. Coming out of COVID, I said advertising going forward and the way we do business has to be personal. If you're not giving back, you're taking away. Joe and Julie have create a multiple foundations, and one of the ones, and I want you guys to talk in depth, and I'm going to ask Julie to talk about the loving classroom, and Joe, you can kind of support her on that. And Julie, thank you for sitting and listening to your husband's story. I know you probably heard it 1,001 times, and I know from reading the book. Sir, I'm so proud of both of you guys. And like I said, anything and everything that I can do with my platform, even Julie, if you don't want to carry his luggage at his next trip, Joe, call me up. I'll go with you.
Thank you, Kevin.
So tell us about the loving classroom, Julie.
Well, we do. There's two things that we're involved with. One is Let's Localize, and the other one is Loving Classroom, which is very new to us, Loving Classroom. But they're both education focused, with younger children, not necessarily older children. The Let's Localize build is a platform that brings local businesses and local schools together under one digital platform. There's the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, we have a digital village now, so that the community can come together. Businesses, schools, and teachers can and parents all on the same platform. If schools need something, they can ask on the platform. If local businesses can help in whatever shape or form that is, they will provide it. And vice versa, businesses can say, we've got an excess of, say, laptops, or we're changing iPads, or I've got some men free a couple of days next week. Does anybody need any work doing? And then schools can say, oh, I need this. Businesses can say, I can give you this. So it's a community helping to bring to schools the things that government, the government can't give absolutely everything. So Let's Localize, have a digital platform where we can all work together to make children's lives in school a lot nicer, a lot easier. And then the Living Classroom side is a different group, and they have got a syllabus that is a 38-week syllabus. There's a book set out for every lesson, and it comes under the sort of the personal and welfare classes that children do. And it teaches children to be grateful, teaches gratitude, kindness, respect for others, thoughtfulness, all centered around talking about, being kind to each other. Gratitude. It's fully up and running in Israel. It's fully up and running in South Africa, and it's now just on its pilot scheme in the UK. So we just started to learn more about this and be more, and we're supporting where we can with exposure into the UK. So that's the two things we're mainly involved with.
And we hope to get both global.
Yes, we hope to.
Right.
The challenge for Let's Localize is to actually help at some point 1 billion children.
All right, Joe, Julie, when you come to the U.S., I know your dealings with U.S. Distribution and reps over here. Feel free to use me when you come over here. I can guarantee you won't have any of the issues you had with some of the ones you had in your books. I work my butt off. And for those of you that are just tuning in, if you want to reach Joe, you can reach him on Twitter, .com/Reebok founder, Instagram, Reebok the founder, Facebook, JW Foster Heritage, and LinkedIn. There's so many letters, I don't know how to do that, but his book is available on Amazon.com. It's on all the platforms, Kindle, the UK for the audio version. Joe, Julie, I always ask this of every single guest, well, 99% of the guests that come on our show, and I want to thank you in advance. If you had one wish to come true, I always see your ask, ASK, and it's hard to believe I would ask someone that pretty much has one of the biggest hearts and one of the greatest social circles on this planet, what your ask would be. But if you had one thing that can come true, something that you can do or have done for you, the people that listen to my podcast and subscribe, they're not the people that drive by an accident, they stop and help. So I'm going to sit back and ask you what your ask, ASK, would be.
You want to go first or me?
Mine's the same as yours.
Well, yes. We would love you to buy the book, and then we can do more with our charity work. We think that there's really no point in writing a book unless people read it. And I think you alluded to that earlier.
Right.
So we'd love you to buy the book and get to know us and get to know more about Let's Localize, get to know more about the loving classroom, because it's this giving back. And I think if we can give that back, and if we can get people, we can make these global. People really become more involved in life, in living it. And, the future is the children. And that's why we are involved in both of those charities. So please buy the book, please read it, please get to know us, and then we can all get together and help children.
All right, Julie, you want to add anything to that?
Nope. It's a team.
It's a team.
That's what we do.
And just remember, to my listeners, no one can do this one thing alone. Without people like Joe and Julie, Reebok and these charities and these foundations would not exist. Without people like yourself, my listeners, the conversations that we have would not be conversations worth listening to, and these stories will never get told. We appreciate all of our loyal fans and listeners, and we do hope this episode brings you a little closer to the person you're sitting next to. It gives you a little bit more insight and understanding how businesses start, grow, and they fail, how they overcome, how they go from the darkness into the light, and how they wind up being stories like Joe Foster, the original shoemaker. I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate this time. And I know you guys are busy with your tour and everything else. I appreciate Penelope for making the introduction. When you get to the States, my home is your home. You're more than welcome. You don't have to stay in a hotel. I'm just outside of Philadelphia. This is an open invitation. My circle of friends are small, and you are now in that inner circle. My listeners, please reach out and help. My grandfather says, whenever you get to a point that you can help someone, it is your duty to do so. Reach one, teach one. And with that said, we'll fade to black. Thank you, everyone, for listening.